So welcome everybody. My name is Chermaine Kwant, as Kimberly already told you. And today I will tell you something about my profession, which is nutrition, and especially related to pulmonary hypertension and how you can improve quality of life. But first, I will tell a little bit more about my own background. Um, as Kimberly told, I'm a nutritionist. When I was 33 years old, I finished my education as a nutritionist, as a dietitian, and I had a great interest in cardiovascular disease. And after my study, I started directly my own practice, my own outpatient clinic. And I thought I was as healthy as could be, but unfortunately, 2 years later, when I was 25 years old, I got diagnosed with pulmonary arterial hypertension. This is a photo of me in the Amsterdam University Medical Center with my former doctor, Professor Vonk Noordegraaf. He's very famous in the PH field, and he became my doctor, and this man saved my life. We had a lot of discussions on nutrition and pulmonary hypertension. As a nutritionist, I asked him um, if he knew how to improve quality of life with pulmonary hypertension, and he told me there was no scientific research and no information on this topic yet. So I tried all types of diet on myself, and I did everything I could to improve my quality of life. And although um, I seemed quite healthy on the outside, I felt that I get worse and worse during the years. And after 5 years, a lung transplant was inevitable. And after 5 weeks on the intensive care unit, um, I could say that this transplant was successful. I was there for quite some time on the ICU, and I got intubated several times because I was too weak to breathe myself. And that is one of the reasons, well, not one of the reasons, it is the reason my voice is like this. This is because the intubation several times. So I can't scream or yell, but I can talk still, luckily. And after my transplant, I came back to the hospital in Amsterdam to visit my doctor, to visit Professor Vonk. And he asked me to tell him again the way that I thought about nutrition in pulmonary hypertension. And I started explaining to him all the things that I thought about this topic. And he asked me if I wanted to do research, what I would like to study and why. So I told him that I would like to assess the nutritional status in pulmonary hypertension. I would really like to learn the way vitamin and mineral status was in the blood, the way the patients would eat, because we don't know nothing about that. And I also would like to test diverse types of interventions, such as e-learning on nutrition and some diets. Well, he was very excited about my vision on this, and he asked me to start a PhD on this topic. And tomorrow I will turn 37, and within 2 months, I hope to finish my dissertation. And the name of my study is the Uphill Study, and the complete title is A Nutrition and Lifestyle Intervention in Patients with Pulmonary Arterial Hypertension and the Effect on Quality of Life. So, and today I will present you some of the results of this study. And at the end of this presentation, you will have learn about the nutritional intake. So what do the patients with pulmonary hypertension eat and whether this is healthy or not. You will learn about the deficiencies. There are some deficiencies that we already know of, but we also found some new, very interesting deficiencies. And I will also give you a lot of tips and tricks um, in how to improve your nutritional status, as the way you eat, and your vitamin and mineral status, and hopefully by that um, improve your quality of life. So for the first part of the uphill study, I wanted to assess the nutritional status, and therefore we collected blood samples to perform analysis on vitamin and mineral status, but also we gave the patients a very big questionnaire with 57 pages about their nutritional intake. So they had to fill out this questionnaire, and they had to fill in questions about what they had eaten uh, per day for the last 4 weeks. So they had to fill out, I ate meat 7 days a week or 4 days a week, and then how many meat they would eat on that day. So this gives us a broad overview of their nutritional intake, and I'm going to tell you this the most interesting results of this. So what is important to know up front before I'm going to tell you about the results is that there are no current guidelines for pulmonary hypertension and nutrition. So we use the guidelines that are common in heart failure, and that contains salt and the fluid restriction, but there is no evidence for these guidelines in pH. And I was wondering whether the patients stick to these guidelines, so sodium or salt restriction and the fluid restriction. And I was also wondering if these guidelines were applicable in pulmonary hypertension, and maybe if we overlooked some other important nutrients that maybe should be lowered or should be elevated. And I want to explain to you why we use these guidelines in heart failure. The fluid restriction is mainly to help the heart, because when your heart is failing, you want to um, um, you want to make sure that the heart doesn't have to work as hard, because it already is suffering because of um, the pressure of the pulmonary artery. And every time that you drink, and when you drink a lot of fluid, your heart has to pump it around. So it's like a real big burden for your heart to pump these fluids through your body every time that you drink. So therefore, it's advised that most people have a fluid restriction with heart failure or pulmonary hypertension. And the salt restriction, well, within heart failure, the salt restriction is mainly because of lowering the blood pressure. Most people with heart failure have a high blood pressure. Well, that is contradictory in pulmonary hypertension due to the medication. Most patients with pulmonary hypertension have a low blood pressure. So why do we advise this still in pulmonary hypertension to lower your salt intake? And that is mainly because the thought behind this is that when you eat a lot of salt, uh, you will get thirsty, because the salt makes you thirsty and you want to lower the fluid intake. So this is a little background on what guidelines we use. But then again, keep in mind that there is no evidence for these guidelines in pulmonary hypertension, but we don't know it, and there's never been any research on this topic yet until now, because I'm going to present it to you. So the first outcome is that we looked into the fluid intake in our group of patients. 37 patients participated in this study with a NIA2, so world class of heart failure number 2, and they were stable under treatment. And the advice with a fluid restriction in heart failure is to drink not more than 2 liters a day, between 1500 milliliters and 2 liters a day. So what we did saw was that about 30% exceeded the daily fluid intake, but there were also some patients who drink, yeah, not enough. And I think this patient maybe didn't understand the questionnaire, but well, we have to take it in this study because he filled out the total questionnaire. And what did they drink? So that is also very interesting. Well, and in the Netherlands, it's very common to drink coffee and tea throughout the day. I don't know if that's the same in Canada, but maybe you can tell me later. And also they drink a lot of water, dairy. We drink a lot of milk and buttermilk in the Netherlands. And a small part, I think about 30, yeah, I think 30, 25, 25, 24% contains of soft drinks, juices, soup, and alcohol. And also, what a lot of people forget is that within your daily intake of fluid, also the soup counts within, and also the dairy products such as yogurt. So the first finding of this study was that although most patients were within the in, advised intake of fluid, 30% exceeded their daily fluid intake. And then we looked into the sugar intake. We were very interested in the amounts of sugar because um, um, I hypothesized that sugar could also cause a higher amount of thirst. And the advice, um, and also sugar is linked to a lot of other diseases, developing other diseases such as diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So I was very interested in how many grams of sugar patients would eat per day. And for females, the maximum amount of added sugar per day is 27.5 gram. And for males, it's 30 grams per day or 35 grams per day. Um, and as you can see, in the males, 100% of the participants exceeded the advised daily sugar intake. And I think 90 or 95 percent of the females exceeded the daily sugar intake. So what did they mainly had their sugar intake from? Well, 38% came from sugared beverages, but 62% came from other nutritional intakes, such as dairy, candy, bakery, and cereals. So well, although this is comparable with the overall Dutch population, we found this very interesting because, well, we didn't know that our patients eat that much sugar. And then the last finding, we looked into the sodium intake. The maximum sodium intake for patients with cardiovascular disease is 2,400 milligrams per day. Um, and although some of our patients exceeded this intake, we also saw another trend, and that was that a lot of our patients, almost 50%, had 1,500 milligrams of sodium intake per day or even less. And even 4 patients had a sodium intake below 500 milligrams per day, which is actually dangerous because your body can't work with that low amount of sodium in it, because it's it is not only to add flavor to your nutrition, but it also plays an important role together with potassium for several functions in your body. So what we thought of this was that we always were so firm with our advice to lower the sodium, that we forgot that some patients took it way too serious. So this was a very interesting finding also. And what we also saw in this, similar to the sugar, was that the main intake came from processed foods. Well, what we did after this was compare um, the fluid intake and the sugar intake. And what we saw was that there was an um, correlation between the sugar and fluid intake, and this was significant. So we could conclude that the more the patients eat sugar, the higher amount of fluid they would take in. And now I can imagine that you would say, well, that's not so special because the patients who drink a lot and getting a lot of sugar were the ones who drink a lot of sugared beverages. Well, that wasn't true because, as you can see, only a small part um, of our group took in sugared fluids, beverages. And as I mentioned before, you could see that it was only 38% sugared beverages. So what we could conclude of this was that the more sugar a patient would eat, the more he or she would drink. So what can we learn from this is that we focused all this time on lowering the sodium intake to lower the fluid intake. But what we found in this study was that we should actually focus more on the sugar intake, on lowering the sugar intake to lower the fluid intake. And that was a very interesting finding on this part. So what can you learn from this? The first thing to learn is that it's not that bad to add a little bit salt. I know a lot of patients, and I probably think that also a lot of people in the audience have learned from their doctors, practitioners, or maybe even from their nutritionists that they had to skip salt. I can agree with that, but there are also a lot of papers nowadays, very good studies that show that a high amount of sodium is as worse as a low amount of sodium, or you can say the other way around. A low amount of sodium, a low intake of sodium is as worse as a high intake of sodium. So what I always tell my patients is that when you prepare all your meals yourself, you can easily add some salt to flavor up your dish. And when you skip all the sodium, that is will be eventually even bad for your health. So this is the first thing that I want to give you as a tip. If you prepare your meals yourself, you can easily add some salt to it to add more flavor. Then the next one, I added some maple syrup. I know it's very stereotyping, but I thought, well, I I will take some Canadian products in my presentation. Um, what we learned was that many patients, 90 up to 100% of our population, used too much sugar. They ate too much sugar and in their daily intake. And by lowering the sugar intake, you can easily lower your fluid intake. So I think the most important thing to learn from this part of our study is to focus more on the sugar intake instead of the salt intake. And what was also very interesting was that the products with a lot of sugar and a lot of salt were ultra processed foods. And ultra processed foods are actually all the things that are from fast food restaurants, pre-prepared meals, deep fried snacks, sodas, and those products are closely related to a higher incidence in cardiovascular disease. So if you want to improve your quality of life, the first thing that you should do is skip the ultra processed foods. The more you prepare yourself, the more you can control what you put in your food and the more healthy it will become. What I want to add, because I only mentioned the grams of sugar, the maximum of grams, um, for you have to take in a maximum of 8 small cubes of sugar per day. So to compare this, that is similar to half a glass of soda. And so, for example, for 200 milliliters of soda, it's about 24 grams of sugar per portion. So the next part of this study was to assess the vitamin and mineral status to see whether we could find some new deficiencies. And what we know is that 50% of the pulmonary hypertension patients have a vitamin D deficiency. Um, and we could confirm this also in our population. I think this is not very interesting, not that I don't think it's very important to recognize the vitamin D deficiency and to do something about it, but 50% of the world population has a vitamin D deficiency. And why is vitamin D so important? It's important for your immune system, um, but also for the way you feel and also for your bones. So it's for your bones. It's very important to have enough vitamin D for strong skeleton and everything and for your teeth. Um, what we also know is that an iron deficiency is very common in pulmonary hypertension. And we could also um, um, we also saw this in our study population again. So if you are feeling fatigue, which is very common in pulmonary hypertension, but you can always ask your doctor to check your blood on iron deficiency, and actually we can easily help you with this. So I think it's very important to check this now now and then, and also the vitamin D, but I will come to that later. So what was a new deficiency, which was very interesting, I think, was the vitamin B12, the functional vitamin B12. And vitamin B12 is a very important vitamin for your energy levels, and you will feel fatigue and also like a brain fog when you don't have, not a brain frog, I pronounced it the wrong way, but also a brain fog, so you can feel like you're not here when you're talking with someone. And um, they because those features are similar to pulmonary hypertension, it's easily overlooked, and it's way more easily overlooked because the vitamin B levels are actually normal in the blood. But as you can see here, this is the normal value of vitamin B. And but when there are elevated levels of methylmalonic acid, it's a very difficult name, you don't have to remember that. But what we saw, um, 30% of our patients had normal levels of vitamin B12, but due to the elevated levels of MMA, the vitamin B12 can't function properly in your body. So this is a very interesting finding that needs further research, but it's worth to ask your doctor if you maybe could be tested on this when you're feeling these types of complaints. So the next thing what was very interesting was the vitamin K1 and K2. Vitamin K, I think the patients with blood thinners might heard of it because vitamin K makes your blood thicker, but it also has a lot of other functions. It's very good for your cells, for your liver, and also linked to cardiovascular health. And that is especially vitamin K2 because the vitamin K2 makes sure that the calcium, which will become hard like a bone structure due to the vitamin D, the vitamin K makes sure that it gets in the right place. So vitamin K2 actually cleans your arteries and makes sure that the calcium gets into the bones. So it's a very important vitamin, and it's mainly provided by leafy greens and vegetables. Wow, in our study, and this is something that we see throughout the Dutch population, all the patients had a vitamin K2 deficiency. But more interestingly, was that we found a vitamin K1 deficiency in 60% of our population. So these are the patients that are deficient. And also in our population, a lot of patients use the vitamin K antagonists, which are the blood thinners. So what we thought was that, well, the ones with the vitamin K deficiency are the ones that use the blood thinners. But as you can see, there was no relation between vitamin K antagonist or not the use of vitamin K antagonist. Even more patients with no blood thinners had a vitamin K1 deficiency. So this is a very interesting finding that we have to look further into. So maybe it has to do something with the low intake of vegetables, because only 2 of our patients had enough vegetable, had a good vegetable intake. So that's very low amount. Um, but also it could have to do something with the gut bacteria, with the microbiome. Vitamin K is also produced in the microbiome, and there are some papers that show that patients with pulmonary hypertension have an altered microbiome. So this is a very interesting finding, and I think it provides a lot of possibilities for further research, and hopefully we can find something interesting on that topic. And then the last one, we also looked into the selenium levels. Selenium is a very important mineral for the mitochondria, and then those are the energy parts in your cell. So, well, as you know, as a pulmonary hypertension patient, you have a lot, not a lot, you have a great loss of energy, and well, maybe can selenium play a big role in this part. And what we found was that the advised status, oh, excuse me, the advised status of selenium is above 100 micrograms, But we already saw elevated quality of life where when patients hired their amount before the 100 milligrams. So this might suggest that patients with pulmonary hypertension need other reference values of selenium. So this is also very interesting because this is one thing that I always mention, that um, the, the the reference values of vitamin and minerals um, are based on the typical healthy general population. But I don't know the way you see this, but I think none of us will fit in the typical general healthy population and will fit in the reference values. So this is a very important finding on that topic. And maybe in the future we can discuss reference values and we can find that patients with pulmonary hypertension have other needs or even higher needs of certain vitamins and minerals. So what can you learn from this? The first thing is that it is very important to check your vitamin D levels. And if it's possible, I don't know about the weather in Canada, but over here it's only raining nowadays and all for a very long period, actually. But it's very important when the sun is shining that you will go into direct sunlight for 10 minutes per day. And the best time to do is in the morning, because in the morning you will get enough of vitamin D throughout sunlight. And what also is very important is to eat enough vegetables, not only for the vitamin K levels, but also for other vitamins and minerals, which are very important and which you extra need, not only due to the illness, but also due to medication use. And I always advise people to eat 500 grams of vegetables per day. And I think it might sound as a lot, but you can easily eat vegetables with every meal. So, for example, with breakfast, you can slice up some cucumber and some tomatoes. So you already have a good start of the day with some minerals in it. And what I want to mention is that um, I didn't tell you about these deficiencies that you will start buying all types of supplements and will take these in, but it's more to show you that we have so much to learn on the nutritional status of pulmonary hypertension, and that hopefully with future research we get more insights on this. So don't go taking all types of supplements, because not all are good for you, not all are effective, and some might even do harm. So always contact a nutritionist or a dietitian or your home practitioner to get advice on this topic. It's very important that you do and not just go doctoring yourself. Um, and if you want to make sure that you need some extra vitamins or minerals, just ask your doctor to perform some blood analysis for you. So vitamin D, iron, the functional B12, I think those are very interesting things to learn about your body, and maybe some easy ways to improve your quality of life. So to sum up, the first findings of the uphill study, we found that the patients had a high intake of sugar, which was correlated to the fluid intake. And um, also, we found that some patients took in even too low sodium. So I think it's way more important to focus on your sugar intake instead of your sodium intake, especially when it comes to fluid restriction. And also make sure that you don't eat processed foods, and certainly not ultra processed foods. So skip them from your diet, or make a decision for yourself that you will only eat this one day a week or something like that. And keep in mind that the smallest change can have the biggest effect in your body. Um, After this period of assessing the nutritional status, we performed some interventions in the patients, as I mentioned earlier, the e-learning and the diet. Um, and Uh, the results of this part of the study are currently under review, and hopefully within a few weeks, this paper will get accepted, and I can tell you the findings from this study. And I think it's a great opportunity to provide some nutritional lessons to the patients in Canada, and also to improve their quality of life. So thank you so much for your attention, and I hope I've learned you something with this presentation.